I nearly left her behind 3 times. That little gray kitten with white paws, mewing in her crate at every station between St. Louis and Wyoming territory. A foolish thing to bring west, the conductor told me at the third stop. His voice heavy with the certainty men carry when they think they know better. But I'd lost enough already. I wasn't leaving her, too. I named her Pearl. Something precious and small. Like the hope I was carrying in my carpet bag along with 2 dresses and my mother's Bible. December 1883. The train rattled through frozen landscape that looked nothing like the green hills of home. Home. I caught myself using that word for a place that no longer existed. Papa's boarding house had been sold 6 months after he died, the money barely covering his debts. I'd stayed on as long as the new owner tolerated me, setting 1 plate at the kitchen table each night. Listening to the house echo with other people's lives, the loneliness had weight. I'd learned that. It pressed against your ribs at night. Made you count the hours until sunrise, just so you could pretend busyness meant purpose. I'd found the advertisement in a 3-week-old newspaper someone left in the parlor. Widower seeking housekeeper and companion, Wyoming territory, respectful arrangement. Please respond with references. I'd written the letter 3 times before sending it. Burned the first 2 in the kitchen stove and told myself I was being ridiculous. A woman didn't marry a stranger just because she was lonely. Except I did. I answered Thomas Brennan's letter, and he answered mine. And somewhere in the careful words we wrote to each other, we made a bargain. He needed help raising his son. I needed a home. Some deals are made with hope rather than certainty. I told myself that was enough. Last stop before the junction. The conductor called. I smoothed my traveling dress with shaking hands. It was blue wool, the nicest thing I owned, carefully mended at the cuffs where it had worn thin. I wanted to look capable, sturdy, like a woman who could run a household and not break under the weight of Western winters. Pearl mewed from her crate. I slipped my finger through the slats, felt her rough tongue on my skin. We'll be all right, I whispered. We have to be. I wondered if loneliness was reason enough to marry a stranger. Papa would have said no, but Papa was gone. And I'd learned that being alone and being lonely were 2 different kinds of suffering. I'd survived alone. I didn't think I could survive lonely much longer. The train slowed. Through the frosted window, I saw a wooden platform, a handful of buildings huddled against the wind, mountains rising in the distance like walls. Somewhere in this frozen territory, a man I'd never met was waiting. I picked up Pearl's crate and my carpet bag. 3 times I nearly left her at stations along the way. 3 times I picked up her crate and kept going. I suppose we were both heading toward uncertain homes. The conductor called out the station name. I stepped into the aisle, my legs unsteady from days of sitting. Other passengers pushed past men heading to mines, a family relocating. Everyone moving toward their own uncertain futures. At the door, I paused. The cold air hit my face like a slap. I could still turn around, ride back east, find some other way to survive. But I was tired of surviving. Tired of 1 plate at the table. Tired of listening to other people's lives through thin walls. I stepped down onto the platform. This is the right choice, I told myself. It has to be. Thomas Brennan had kind eyes. I noticed that first. Tired? Yes. And holding a grief so heavy, I could almost see it settling on his shoulders. But kind. He was older than I'd expected, early 40s. Maybe with work-roughened hands and a face weathered by wind and sun. He took my carpet bag without a word about the kitten mewing from her crate. "Miss Alma," he said, and his voice was gentle. "Welcome." I wanted to ask him to call me just Alma, but my throat felt too tight for words. I managed a nod. The wagon ride to the ranch stretched long and awkward. Thomas tried to make conversation, asked about my journey, pointed out landmarks I'd never remember. I gave short answers, watching the landscape roll past. Everything was so open here. So much sky. Back east, the world felt contained by trees and hills. Here, it felt like you could fall right off the edge of everything. I should tell you, Thomas said after a long silence, about Jamie, my son. He's 8. He doesn't talk much these days. I turned to look at him. His jaw was tight. Since his mother passed, he continued, last September. He hasn't spoken more than a handful of words since then. Don't take it personal. My heart sank. September. 3 months of silence. I'd expected a child who needed care. Maybe. I hadn't expected grief. This fresh. This deep. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. We arrived at the ranch as afternoon light was fading. The house was larger than I'd imagined, 2 stories. Well built, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. Everything looked tidy, maintained, but as we drew closer, I noticed what was missing. No Christmas decorations, though it was mid-December. No wreath on the door. No pine branches. Nothing to mark the season. The house was clean. Yes, but it felt like someone had scrubbed away every trace of joy along with the dust. Thomas helped me down from the wagon, carried my bag to the porch. Inside, warmth from a well-tended stove. Everything in its place. A kitchen table set for 2, Thomas and his son. I realized, no place for me yet. Jamie. Thomas called softly. Come meet Miss Alma. I saw movement in the hallway shadows. Then a boy appeared, and my breath caught. 8 years old. Thomas had said, but Jamie looked smaller, thinner. His eyes were too old for his face, hollow and distant, like he was looking at something far beyond what I could see. He wore trousers that needed mending and a shirt that hung loose on his frame. I tried to smile. Hello, Jamie. I'm pleased to meet you. He looked at me like I was a ghost. Or maybe he was the ghost, and I was the living intruder in his world of silence. His gaze dropped to Pearl's crate. Something flickered across his face. Not quite interest, but not emptiness either. Then he turned and disappeared back into the shadows. Thomas's shoulders slumped. I'm sorry, it's been hard. Don't apologize, I said, but my hands trembled as I set Pearl's crate down. What on earth had I walked into that evening? Thomas showed me to the spare room he'd prepared, separate from his own. He made clear, respectful distance. A marriage in name only. For now, maybe forever. We hadn't discussed that part. The room was small but clean. A bed, a washstand, a window overlooking the yard. Someone Thomas, I supposed, had put fresh linens on the bed. Tried to make it welcoming. I sat on the edge of the mattress and opened Pearl's crate. She stepped out cautiously, sniffing the unfamiliar space. I gathered her into my lap, buried my face in her soft fur. Outside my door, I heard Thomas walk past Jamie's room. Heard him pause. Heard the silence stretch. Then his footsteps continued down the hall. A father, not knowing how to reach his son. I wondered what I had to offer this broken house. I was just a woman who couldn't even keep her father's boarding house from being sold. What made me think I could help anyone? Pearl purred against my chest. At least, I'd brought her. At least I wasn't completely alone in this strange new place. I lay down in the dark, listening to the house settle around me. Somewhere in the distance, cattle called. Wind rattled the windows. This was my home now. Or it would be. If I could figure out how to belong here. The first 3 days passed in careful routine. I cooked meals Thomas barely tasted, cleaned a house that was already clean, tried to make myself useful while staying out of the way. Thomas worked outside tending stock, fixing fences, doing whatever ranchers did in December. Jamie drifted through the house like smoke, there and not there, present but unreachable. I watched him. Couldn't help it. The way he moved along walls instead of through open spaces. The way he took food to his room instead of eating at the table. The way he never, ever made a sound. On the 4th day, I let Pearl out of my room. She'd been patient, my little companion, but she needed to explore. She padded down the hallway, tail high, investigating this new territory. I followed at a distance, watching her sniff corners and bat at dust motes in the morning light. Jamie appeared in the doorway of the front room, watching, not approaching, but not retreating either. Pearl noticed him, walked right up to his feet, and sat down, looking up at him with her green eyes. Jamie's hands twitched at his sides. I'd brought a ribbon with me, something I'd used to keep her entertained on the train. I pulled it from my pocket and dragged it across the floor. Pearl pounced, all 4 paws attacking the strip of cloth, her small body wiggling with the effort. The corner of Jamie's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something. I kept dragging the ribbon. Pearl kept pouncing, and Jamie kept watching, his eyes tracking every movement. I moved slowly, knelt down beside Pearl, keeping my movements gentle, unthreatening. I stroked her back, let her purr fill the quiet room. Then I looked at Jamie. Would you like to hold her? He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. I picked up Pearl, stood, walked the few steps to where Jamie stood frozen. She's very soft, I said quietly, and she likes gentle hands. I held her out, waiting, not pushing. Jamie's hands trembled as they reached out. I placed Pearl carefully in his arms, showed him how to support her weight. The kitten settled against his chest and purred. Jamie's whole body went still. His hands, so carefully positioned, barely moved, but his fingers, slowly, so slowly, began to stroke her gray fur. I stepped back, gave him space, watched as something in his face shifted, the hollowness receding just a fraction, something alive flickering behind his eyes. That evening, at supper, Jamie glanced at me twice. 2 quick looks, there and gone. But Thomas noticed. I saw him see it. Saw hope cross his face before he tamped it down. After Jamie went to bed, Thomas and I sat at the kitchen table with coffee. He wrapped both hands around his cup like he needed the warmth. Thank you, he said quietly, for being patient with him. I brought her for company. I told him I didn't realize she might help him too. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Thomas said, We're not. I don't expect. He struggled with the words. We're trying to save my son. That's what matters most. I understood what he wasn't saying. We hadn't discussed love or even affection. Thomas needed help raising his son. I needed a home. Some bargains are made with hope rather than certainty. I told myself that would be enough. But watching Jamie's face when he'd held Pearl, seeing that flicker of life return, I'd felt something shift in my chest. Something that felt dangerously like purpose. I wasn't here to be a wife. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I was here to help this child find his way back to living. And somehow, A small gray kitten I'd almost abandoned 3 times was going to help us do it. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the deal we'd made, Thomas and I, though we'd never spoken it aloud. We weren't trying to build a romance. We were trying to save his son. I could do that. I could help a child heal. I had to believe that was enough. 2 weeks passed, and I stopped counting days, started counting other things instead. How many times Jamie appeared when I fed Pearl each morning? How many seconds his hand would rest on her fur before pulling away? How many almost smiles flickered across his face when she did something amusing? Small things, silent things, but they mattered. We developed a language without words. Jamie and I'd set out scraps for Pearl, and he'd materialize beside me. I'd brush her fur, and his hand would reach out to help. I never asked, never pushed, just made space for him, and slowly, so slowly, he filled it. One morning, I found him sitting on the floor of my room, Pearl curled in his lap. He looked up when I entered, his eyes wide, afraid he'd done something wrong. "It's all right," I said softly. "She likes you." His fingers resumed their careful stroking. Pearl purred louder. I sat down beside them. Not too close. "She needs a proper bed," I said. "Something soft and warm. Would you help me make one?" He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. I gathered fabric scraps from my sewing basket pieces, too small for anything useful, but perfect for a cat bed. Jamie watched as I showed him how to arrange them, creating layers. Then he disappeared. I thought I'd pushed too far, asked too much. But he came back carrying a small wooden box from the barn, rough-hewn, probably used for tools once, but the right size, perfect, I told him, and meant it. We worked together in silence. My hands in his, arranging fabric, making something soft. Pearl supervised from the windowsill, tail twitching. "Does she need a blanket?" Jamie whispered. The words were so quiet, I almost missed them. His first question, first words, directed at me. I kept my voice steady, my movements calm. Couldn't let him see how much those 4 words meant. "I think she'd like that," I said. "Something small, just for her." He nodded, just once. But it was communication, connection. That evening I set the table and realized I'd put out 3 plates without thinking. When had that happened? When had this stopped being Thomas's house and started being our house? I noticed. The second coffee cup before I realized I'd set it out. Old habits. I told myself, lies. Myself answered. I was setting a place for hope. Thomas came in from the cold. Stopped when he saw the 3 places set. Something crossed his face. Gratitude. Maybe. Or relief. "Smells good," he said. I'd made stew. Nothing fancy. But the house smelled like cooking. Like life. Instead of the empty silence that had greeted me 2 weeks ago. Jamie came to the table without being called. Sat in his chair. Pearl followed him. Curled up beneath his feet. We ate together. Thomas tried to make conversation. Jamie was quiet, but he was present. Actually sitting with us instead of taking food to his room. I caught myself thinking this could work. This strange arrangement. This unlikely family. Christmas was a week away. The house still had no decorations, no acknowledgement of the season. But that could change. I decided, should change. The next day, while Thomas worked outside and Jamie did his morning chores, I bundled up and walked to the tree line behind the house. Found pine branches, still green despite the cold. Gathered an armful and brought them back. Jamie found me arranging them on the mantel, He stood in the doorway, watching. "Would you help?" I asked. He crossed the room slowly, took a branch I offered. We worked together, creating something that looked almost festive. Pearl investigated each branch we placed, batting at needles, making us both smile. Thomas came in from the cold, stopped in the doorway. His eyes moved from the pine branches to Jamie to me. His throat worked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. It's been a long time since this house felt like... He didn't finish. Didn't need to. I understood. I was making us into something we hadn't been, making this house feel alive again. And none of us were stopping me. I'd developed a language with Jamie that needed no words. He'd appear when I fed Pearl. I'd pause, and his small hand would reach out to help. We were learning each other through a kitten's needs. Learning trust. Learning that it was safe to be close to another person again. I wondered when I'd started counting his footsteps. When had his silence become familiar? When had I begun to notice the exact moment each morning when he'd appear in the kitchen doorway, looking for Pearl? When had they become we in my mind? The word was so quiet I almost missed it. Soft. Jamie's voice, barely a whisper. His fingers stroking Pearl's head. I froze mid-motion, the coffee pot halfway to the stove, afraid breathing would shatter the moment. Afraid I'd imagined it. Afraid it was real. He looked up at me. Eye contact for the first time in weeks, and said it again. Soft. My throat closed. Tears burned behind my eyes. I set the coffee pot down carefully, my hands shaking. Knelt to his level beside the chair where he sat with Pearl in his lap. "Yes, sweetheart," I managed, voice steady despite everything breaking inside me. Very soft. "She likes when you're gentle." He kept stroking Pearl's fur. The kitten purred louder, pushing her head into his palm. "Does she like milk?" he whispered. More words. A question. Connection. "A little bit," I said. "Would you like to give her some?" He nodded. I poured a small amount into a saucer, set it on the floor. Jamie placed Pearl beside it, watched her lap delicately. His eyes followed every movement, and I could see his mind working, thinking, engaging with the world again. "Can cats see in the dark?" he asked. I almost laughed from relief, from joy, from the sheer miracle of hearing this child ask questions. "They can?" I told him, "much better than we can. That's why Pearl likes to explore at night." "Oh." He considered this. "That's why I hear her moving in your room sometimes. That's why..." We sat together on the kitchen floor, watching Pearl finish her milk. Jamie asked 2 more questions, simple things about cats, about Pearl specifically. I answered each one carefully, treasuring every word. When Thomas came in from his morning work, Jamie looked up and said, "Papa, cats can see in the dark." Thomas stopped mid-step. His face went pale, then flushed. He stared at his son like he was seeing a vision. Tears filled his eyes. "That's so..." he managed. "Miss Alma told me," Jamie said, stroking Pearl, like speaking was normal, like he'd been doing it all along. Thomas looked at me over Jamie's head. I saw everything in that look: gratitude, hope, wonder, fear that it wouldn't last. That evening, after Jamie went to bed, Thomas sat heavily at the kitchen table. I poured him coffee, set it in front of him. He wrapped his hands around the cup, but didn't drink. "I heard him," he said. "I heard his voice. I know. I didn't think..." He stopped, started again. I was starting to think I'd never hear it again. I sat down across from him. "He's still healing," It'll take time. But he spoke. Thomas's voice broke. Because of you. Because of that kitten. His hand covered mine on the table. Brief, warm, gone again. I don't know what we did to deserve you, he said. But I thank God you came. I couldn't speak. Couldn't tell him that I was the one who should be grateful. That this broken family was giving me something I'd needed desperately, a reason to matter. That night, alone in my room, I let myself cry. Not sad tears, overwhelmed tears. This child had trusted me with his voice. This father had trusted me with his son. And somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being a mail-order necessity and started being something else. Something that mattered. Pearl curled against me, purring. I stroked her soft fur and thought about the woman who'd stepped off that train 3 weeks ago. Frightened, uncertain, carrying nothing but a carpet bag and a kitten. That woman had been looking for shelter, for a place to survive. But the woman lying in this bed wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, caring, loving. I wondered when I'd stopped thinking of this as temporary. When had I started imagining next Christmas, next spring? When had these people become mine to love? The thought terrified me. Because wanting something meant it could be taken away. And I'd lost enough already. But looking at Jamie's face when he'd spoken, seeing life return to his eyes, I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. I didn't just want to help this family anymore. I wanted to be this family. God help me, I did. 4 days after Jamie spoke his first words, winter fever came to the house. That morning started ordinary. Jamie asked me questions while we fed Pearl. Does she dream? What does she eat in the wild? Why does she purr? I answered each one, delighting in his curiosity, in the sound of his voice filling the kitchen. By afternoon, he was burning up. I found him curled on his bed, shivering despite the blankets. When I touched his forehead, my heart lurched. Too hot. Dangerously hot. Thomas, I called, trying to keep my voice steady. Thomas, come quick. He took one look at Jamie and went pale. No, not again. I can't. Get me cool water, I said firmly. And clean cloths. Now. I'd nursed my father through his final illness. I knew fever, knew the sound of lungs struggling, the weight of helplessness. But this was different. This was a child I'd started loving without meaning to. I moved into the crisis, like I'd been trained for it. Cool cloths on his forehead, wrists, neck, broth when he'd take it, though most ran down his chin. Medicine from the small supply Thomas kept. Constant vigilance, checking his breathing, his color, his temperature. Thomas paced, helpless, terrified. I can't lose him, too, he whispered. I can't. You won't, I said, praying I was right. We won't. Night fell. I didn't leave Jamie's side. Pearl appeared and curled beside his pillow, refusing to be moved. The kitten's purr filled the quiet room. Steady and sure. Jamie grew worse as the hours passed. His fever climbed, his breathing turned shallow. And then he started crying out, Mama. He whimpered, Mama, where are you? Each word broke my heart. He wasn't calling for me. He was calling for her, the woman I could never be, the mother he'd lost. I wanted to run, to hide from the truth that I could never replace her, would never be who he really needed. But running would mean leaving him alone in his fear. So I stayed. I sang softly, songs my own mother had sung to me. I stroked his hair. I whispered, "I'm here. I'm here," even though I knew I wasn't who he wanted. When he cried for his mama, I pretended my heart wasn't breaking with every word. Thomas found me in the kitchen at dawn. I was making coffee I didn't want. My hands still shaking. "He's sleeping," I told him before he could ask. "Fever broke an hour ago." Thomas sagged against the doorframe. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. My hair falling loose from its pins, my dress wrinkled and stained, exhaustion written on every part of me. "I watched you with him last night," he said quietly. "The way you—" He stopped, started again. "His mother would have been grateful that you love him like that." I hadn't known I'd been that obvious. Hadn't known my armor had cracked so completely. "I do," I whispered. "God help me. I do." We stood in the kitchen as dawn light crept through the windows. Two people who'd started as strangers, bound now by our love for a boy sleeping upstairs. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Thomas said. I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to explain that I needed them just as much. That this house had become home while I wasn't looking. That somewhere between feeding a kitten and hearing a child's voice, I'd given my heart away completely. Jamie recovered slowly. Within 3 days, he was sitting up, asking for Pearl, wondering about the snow falling outside his window. He never mentioned calling for his mother. Maybe he didn't remember. Maybe it was better if he didn't. But I remembered, and I carried it with me, the knowledge that I was a substitute, a stand-in, someone to fill an empty space, but never to truly replace what had been lost. I told myself it didn't matter, that being needed was enough. But late at night, alone in my room, I wondered if I was lying to myself. Christmas Eve, and I stood in the cold barn staring at nothing. Jamie was fine, fully recovered. That very afternoon, he'd been chattering about Pearl, asking if we could give her a Christmas present, talking about the cookies we'd bake tomorrow. Then he'd gone to bed, and I'd heard him through the thin wall between our rooms. "Mama," he'd called out in his sleep, not distressed, just remembering. "Mama, look what I made." It was a dream, just a dream. But it shattered something inside me. I'd sat on my bed for an hour, telling myself I was being foolish. He was 8 years old. Of course he dreamed about his mother. Of course he missed her. That was natural. Healthy. Even. But I couldn't stop thinking he'll never call me that. He'll never call for me in the night. I'm just the woman who happened to bring a kitten. Just someone filling space until he's old enough not to need anyone. I packed my bag in the dark. Not much to pack, I'd arrived with so little. Pearl watched me from the bed, her green eyes unblinking. "I know." I told her, "I'm being a coward." But I couldn't stay. Couldn't keep pretending I was building something real here. Jamie didn't need me. He needed her. His real mother. The woman I'd never be. Better to leave now, before I loved them too much to go. Before they realized I wasn't enough and asked me to leave anyway. I carried my bag to the barn, thinking I'd wait until first light, walk to town, catch the stage, find some other place to pretend I belonged. I was staring at my packed bag when Thomas appeared in the doorway, lamp in hand. "You're leaving." Not a question. I couldn't meet his eyes. "I can't." "He called for her." "Not me." "I'll never be what he needs." Thomas set the lamp down, crossed the barn slowly. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "He doesn't need her back," he said. "He needs someone to help him live now. That's you. That's what you've been doing." teaching him it's all right to love again. But I can't replace. No one's asking you to replace anyone. Thomas's hand rested on my shoulder. We're asking you to stay, to be who you are. That's what Jamie needs. That's what I need. Tears burned down my face. What if I'm not enough? Alma. He said my name like it mattered. You brought my son back to life. You brought light back to this house. You're more than enough. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to so badly. Then a small voice came from the barn door. Where are you going? Jamie stood there in his nightshirt, barefoot in the cold. Pearl in his arms. His eyes were wide, confused, hurt. I knelt down. My bag forgotten. Nowhere. Sweetheart. I was just... Did I make you sad? His voice trembled. When I called for Mama, I didn't mean to. I was dreaming. My heart cracked open. No. You didn't make me sad. Then why are you leaving? I looked at this brave boy who'd found his voice again, who'd let me into his carefully guarded world, who trusted me with his healing. I was scared. I admitted, scared that I wouldn't be good enough for you. Jamie stepped closer. Pearl purred in his arms. You teach me about Pearl. You make the house smell good. You stayed when I was sick. You're enough. Simple words, a child's logic. But they shattered every excuse I'd built. I'd convinced myself it was kindness to leave before they asked me to. Better to run now than be pushed away later. That's what I told myself. That's the lie I'd almost believed. But looking at Jamie in his bare feet, his eyes confused and hurt, Pearl purring in his arms, I understood something. Running wouldn't protect my heart. It was already lost. Given over completely to this boy, this man, this small gray kitten, this impossible family. Fear couldn't take that back. Only I could. And I was tired of being afraid. I stood up, picked up my bag. Jamie's face crumpled. Then I walked past him, back toward the house, carrying my bag to unpack it. You're staying, Jamie asked. Following me, I stopped. Looked at Thomas, then back at this child who'd taught me what courage really meant. Yes, I said. I'm staying. For Christmas. For always. If you'll have me. Jamie launched himself at me, arms tight around my waist. Pearl mewed her protest at being squished between us. Over his head. I met Thomas's eyes. He nodded once, understanding everything I'd just chosen. Everything I'd stopped running from. Tomorrow was Christmas. And I was finally, truly, home. Christmas morning came with Jamie's whisper outside my door. Miss Alma, are you awake? It's Christmas. I smiled in the dark, opened the door to find him already dressed, Pearl weaving between his feet. His eyes were bright, excited, alive. Merry Christmas, Jamie. Merry Christmas. Papa's making coffee, and I helped him with something. A surprise. He took my hand the first time he'd done that and pulled me toward the kitchen. Thomas stood at the stove, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. The pine branches we'd placed looked festive in the morning light. Everything felt different, warmer, more like a home than a house. We ate breakfast together, the three of us talking. Jamie told me about Christmases past, before his mother died. Happy memories instead of painful ones. Thomas smiled more than I'd ever seen. After breakfast, Jamie disappeared to his room. Came back carrying a small wooden box, rough-hewn but made with care. For Pearl, he said, holding it out to me. Papa helped me make it. So she knows she lives here. So she knows this is home. I took the box, my throat tight. It was perfect. Just the right size for a cat bed. But I heard what Jamie wasn't saying. The real question beneath the gift. "Can she stay?" he asked, his voice smaller now, uncertain. "Can Pearl live here forever?" I knelt down to his level, took his hands in mine. This was the moment. The choice I'd been circling since I arrived. The commitment I'd been too afraid to make. "She needs both of us," I said clearly, "to feed her and care for her and keep her safe. Can you help me do that?" Every day, Jamie's face transformed. "Every day, I promise." "Then yes, Pearl can stay forever." He understood what I was really saying, that I was staying, that we were a family now. He threw his arms around my neck. "Thank you. Thank you. Alma." My name, not Miss Alma, just Alma, said with trust and love and the simple certainty of a child who'd chosen me. I held him tight, tears streaming down my face. Over his shoulder, I saw Thomas watching us, his own eyes wet. That evening, after Jamie went to bed exhausted from excitement, Thomas and I sat at the kitchen table. Pearl slept in her new box. The house felt peaceful, complete. "Last night," Thomas said quietly, "when I found you in the barn, I thought I'd lost you both. I'm sorry." I was scared. I know. He reached across the table, took my hand. "I've been scared too. Scared to ask you to stay, really stay, as my wife, Jamie's mother, our family." Then my heart hammered against my ribs. "Thomas, I know this wasn't the arrangement we made." He continued, "I know you came here looking for safety, not love. But these past weeks, watching you with Jamie, seeing what you've brought to our lives." He stopped. "Tried again. I'm asking if you're willing to be my wife, truly, to be Jamie's mother, to build a life with us, if you want to." I thought about the woman on that train, clutching a kitten's crate, terrified of the future. She'd been looking for shelter, for a place to survive. But the woman sitting at this table didn't want survival anymore. She wanted to live, to love, to be loved. I stopped running last night. I said, "I'm not starting again. This is my family now. By choice." Thomas smiled a real smile that changed his whole face. "Then we'll make it official when the circuit preacher comes through next month. If that suits you." "That suits me fine." He stood, pulled me gently to my feet, kissed my forehead softly. "Welcome home, Alma." I rested my head against his chest, listened to his heartbeat, strong and steady. I'd brought a kitten west because I couldn't bear to travel alone. She'd brought me to this, to family, to love, to home. Spring arrived, and with it, everything changed. 6 months since I'd stepped off that train. Half a year of learning how to be a wife, a mother, a woman who belonged somewhere. The learning wasn't always easy, but it was good, real, worth every moment of uncertainty. Jamie followed me everywhere now, a constant stream of questions pouring from him. Why do chickens lay eggs every day? How do you know when bread is ready? Can we plant flowers by the porch? Will Pearl like them? His voice had become my favorite sound, each question a gift, each laugh a miracle I never took for granted. Thomas and I had married in February, the circuit preacher pronouncing us husband and wife in our own front room. Jamie stood between us during the ceremony, one hand holding mine, one holding his father's, making us official, making us whole. The marriage itself grew slowly. carefully. Two wounded people learning to trust again, to love again. But it grew true and deep, built on partnership and respect and genuine affection that deepened with every shared sunrise. And now, standing at the kitchen window with my hand resting on my growing belly, I watched Thomas teach Jamie to build a cradle in the yard for the baby coming in the fall. Their baby sister or brother, our child. Pearl supervised from the porch railing, her own belly round with kittens due any day. Life multiplying, expanding, filling every corner of this house that had once felt so empty. I thought about that woman on the train. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her this. You're heading toward the hardest, most beautiful thing you'll ever do. You'll arrive in winter and find a house, frozen in grief. But you'll stay. You'll choose to stay. And slowly, so slowly, you'll barely notice you'll thaw it back to life. Jamie burst through the kitchen door, breathless with excitement. Mama Alma, come see. We're almost done. Mama Alma. He'd started calling me that in March, naturally, like he'd been saying it his whole life. Every time I heard it, my heart swelled. Let me see, I said, following him outside. The cradle was simple, but sturdy, made with care and love. Thomas's hands and Jamie's working together. Baby will like it, Jamie said confidently. We made it strong. And Papa says I can help take care of the baby. Teach them things. Like you taught me about Pearl. You'll be a wonderful big brother, I told him. He grinned, then ran off to check on Pearl, who'd disappeared behind the barn. Thomas came to stand beside me, his arm around my waist. You all right? Better than all right. Tired, always. I leaned into him, but happy. We stood together in the spring sunshine, watching our son chase a cat. A cradle waiting for the child to come. A home built from broken pieces made whole. They say mail-order brides come west seeking husbands. But I learned something different that winter. I came seeking a home. What I found was a family that needed building, stone by patient stone, with a small gray kitten showing us the way. I learned that healing can't be forced, only invited. That being a mother isn't about replacing anyone. It's about showing up every day with love to give, that sometimes the smallest creatures carry the biggest gifts. Jamie ran back, Pearl in his arms. Can I feed her? She's hungry? Let's feed her together, I said. We walked inside, the three of us, Pearl purring. Through the window, I could see the mountains in the distance. The same mountains I'd seen that first frozen December day. But everything else had changed. I set out Pearl's food while Jamie filled her water bowl. Thomas started coffee. Simple domestic rhythms. The choreography of family. Later, after Jamie went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table where I'd sat so many times before. But now, 2 coffee cups waited, not one. Now drawings covered the walls. Now a cat slept in her bed with kittens tumbling beside her. Now my hand rested on new life growing inside me. I thought about all the plates I'd set for one in that boarding house back east. All the lonely nights, all the empty mornings. And I was grateful for every lonely moment that had led me here, for the courage to answer an advertisement, for the foolish decision to bring a kitten west, for every choice that had brought me to this table, in this house, with this family. I'd spent so long protecting my heart. I'd forgotten hearts were meant to be used, meant to be given, meant to love and be loved in return. Pearl stretched in the sunlight streaming through the window. Older now, but still mine. Still the companion who'd given me courage. Jamie's voice drifted from his room, talking to himself as he fell asleep, planning tomorrow's adventures. Thomas's footsteps on the stairs, coming to find me. Outside. Spring was here. Inside. We were warm. I brought a kitten west because I couldn't bear to travel alone. She brought me home.